I stand in my empty childhood bedroom clutching a crumpled note that reads, "Thanks for clearing it. We didn't want to live with a loser." 24 hours ago, I handed my parents a cashier's check for $390,000 to save their family home from foreclosure. I had liquidated my entire tech startup, sacrificed my dream company, destroyed my relationship with my business partner. Now the house is sold, my parents have vanished to Costa Rica, and I'm homeless. But I'm smiling because they don't know what they actually sold. 3 weeks earlier, my phone rang at 11:37 on a Tuesday night. I was reviewing quarterly reports for TechFlow Solutions, my AI software company based in Austin, when Mom's panicked voice shattered my concentration like glass hitting concrete. "Catalina, sweetheart, I need to tell you something terrible." Dorothy's words came between choking sobs that made my stomach clench with dread. "We're losing the house. The bank is taking everything." I set down my coffee mug, watching steam curl into the office air as my world shifted beneath my feet. "What do you mean, losing the house?" "You said the mortgage was manageable when I called last month." I lied. The admission hung in the silence like smoke from a fire. "Your father." Frank has been gambling. Not just the lottery tickets I told you about. Real gambling. The casino in Sacramento. Online poker sites. Sports betting. Everything Catalina. He's lost everything we had. My hands trembled as I reached for a pen, needing something solid to grip. "How much are we talking about, Mom?" $390,000. Her voice cracked on each syllable. "The foreclosure notice came today. We have 48 hours before they take possession. Not months like I've been telling you. 48 hours. The number hit me like a physical blow. $390,000. My entire childhood flashed through my mind. Birthday parties in the backyard, Christmas mornings, under the oak tree helping Grandma plant roses along the front walkway. 4 generations of my family had lived in that Sacramento home. Great-Grandma Agnes had raised 6 children there during the Depression. Grandpa Harold had built the workshop where he taught me to use tools. Every holiday, every milestone, every precious memory was tied to those walls. "Where's Dad right now?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "He drove somewhere after dinner. Probably back to the casino. He can't stop, honey. He promises he'll quit, then disappears with whatever cash we have left." Dorothy's breathing became ragged. I found credit card bills hidden in his toolbox. Loans I never knew he took out. He's been forging my signature on documents. I closed my eyes, calculating rapidly. TechFlow Solutions was worth approximately $410,000 if I liquidated everything immediately. 5 years of 18-hour workdays, sleeping on the office couch, living on ramen noodles, and determination. My business partner, Sarah Martinez, had invested her life savings, and we were scheduled to meet with venture capitalists next week to secure $2 million in funding. "What about Jake? Can he help?" I asked, knowing the answer. "Your brother's deployed in Afghanistan. Even if he could send money, military pay wouldn't cover this amount." Mom's voice dropped to a whisper. "You're our only hope, Catalina. I know it's not fair to ask, but that house is our family's legacy. It's where you took your first steps, where Grandpa told you stories about his immigration from Mexico, where Grandma taught you her enchilada recipe." I stared at the financial projections on my computer screen, watching 5 years of dreams blur into numbers. Sarah and I had worked toward this moment since college, building algorithms that could revolutionize supply chain management. Our software could save companies millions in logistics costs. The venture capital meeting represented everything we'd sacrificed for. But the house represented who I was, where I came from, the foundation of my identity. "I'll figure something out," I heard myself saying. "Don't sign any papers. Don't talk to anyone from the bank. I'm driving up tomorrow morning." After I hung up, I sat in the darkness of my office, surrounded by the hum of servers and the weight of an impossible choice. Outside, Austin traffic moved like distant thunder, carrying other people toward their normal lives, while mine fractured into pieces I couldn't reassemble. Wednesday morning brought no clarity, only the harsh reality of numbers that refused to add up in any way that didn't destroy someone's future. I called Sarah at 6:45, catching her during her morning run along Lady Bird Lake. "We need to talk," I said without preamble. About the presentation next week, I've been refining the market analysis slides. Sarah's voice carried the enthusiasm that had driven our partnership since graduate school at UT Austin. The venture capitalists are going to love our customer retention data. About liquidating the company. Silence stretched across the line, broken only by Sarah's footsteps slapping against pavement. When she spoke again, her voice had changed completely. Liquidating Catalina, we're 7 days away from the biggest opportunity of our careers. I explained everything. Dad's gambling addiction, the foreclosure timeline, the $390,000 debt. Sarah listened without interrupting, but I could hear her breathing become more labored and not from running. "So you want to throw away 5 years of work because your parents made bad financial decisions?" The coldness in her voice made my chest tighten. "You want to destroy my investment, my future, my dreams because your father can't stay away from poker tables." "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple." Sarah's footsteps stopped entirely. "Your parents are adults who made choices. We're not responsible for fixing their mistakes, especially not by sacrificing everything we've built together." I walked to my apartment's small balcony, watching early morning commuters navigate downtown Austin traffic. Normal people with normal problems heading to normal jobs. The house isn't just property, Sarah. It's 4 generations of family history. And TechFlow isn't just a company. It's 5 years of 16-hour days, every weekend, sacrificed every vacation, skipped every relationship we didn't pursue because we were building this dream together. Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. "You're talking about abandoning our shared vision for parents who've been lying to you about their financial situation for months." The accusation stung because it held truth. Mom had been reassuring me about their finances for over a year, claiming everything was stable, while Dad apparently spiraled deeper into addiction. They'd manipulated me with false information, then sprung the crisis on me with a 48-hour deadline that eliminated any possibility of finding alternative solutions. "I can't let them lose the house," I said quietly. "Then you're choosing them over me, over us, over everything we've worked toward." Sarah's breathing had returned to normal, but her voice carried a finality that chilled me. "If you liquidate TechFlow without my consent, I'll sue you for breach of partnership agreement. I'll take our client list, our employees, our intellectual property. I'll make sure you never work in tech again." The threat hung between us like a blade. Sarah had every legal right to stop me. Our partnership agreement required unanimous consent for major financial decisions. She could tie up the liquidation process in court for months while the foreclosure deadline passed. "Sarah, please, I'll find a way to pay you back, with interest. I'll rebuild everything we've lost." "With what money? From what job you'll be starting over at 28 with no assets, no business, no references?" Sarah's voice softened slightly, carrying genuine sadness. "I understand you love your family, but they're asking you to commit financial suicide. That house represents your past. TechFlow represents our future." After the call ended, I sat on my balcony for 3 hours watching Austin wake up around me. Food trucks opened for breakfast. Crowds, office workers hurried toward glass buildings. Construction crews began their daily noise. Life continued normally for everyone except me. But every time I tried to imagine explaining to Mom that I'd chosen business over family, I saw Grandpa Harold's workshop, where he'd taught me that tools were just instruments. What mattered was building something meaningful with your hands and heart. The house wasn't just real estate. It was the foundation of every lesson that had shaped me into someone capable of building a successful company in the first place. By noon, I'd made my decision. Family comes first, even when family makes terrible choices. Liquidating a 5-year-old tech company in 36 hours requires the kind of desperate efficiency that leaves permanent scars on your professional reputation. I spent Wednesday afternoon calling every potential buyer in my contact list, explaining that TechFlow Solutions was available for immediate purchase at a significant discount. Marcus Stevens from Dallas Digital Systems arrived Thursday morning with a team of accountants and lawyers ready to strip my company like vultures cleaning bones. They offered $280,000 for our patents alone, knowing I had no negotiating leverage. Our equipment worth $60,000 new went for $22,000. Client contracts that had taken years to develop sold for $48,000 to competitors who would honor the agreements while stealing our customers. The office felt like a crime scene as Marcus's team cataloged everything we'd built. Sarah arrived at 11:30, her face pale with disbelief as strangers packed our servers into boxes. "This is really happening," she said, watching our custom software architecture disappear onto a loading truck. "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, like apologizing for an earthquake. "I'll find a way to make this right." Sarah picked up a framed photo from her desk, the two of us celebrating our first major client contract, champagne glasses raised in triumph. "You already have made it right according to your priorities. I hope your family appreciates what you're sacrificing." She walked out without looking back, taking with her the employee database customer contact information and 3 years of industry relationships I'd helped her build. I understood her anger, but it still felt like losing a limb. By 3 o'clock Thursday afternoon, I held a cashier's check for $390,000, representing the liquidated remains of everything I'd worked towards since college. The bank officer, Jennifer Walsh, reviewed the transaction with professional sympathy. "Large family emergency?" she asked while processing the paperwork. "Something like that." I stared at the check, watching 5 years of dreams transform into numbers on paper. "My father has a gambling problem. This covers debts he accumulated without my mother's knowledge." Jennifer's expression shifted to something more personal than professional courtesy. "I've seen similar situations. Addiction affects the whole family, never just the individual with the problem." She handed me the check with gentle firmness. "I hope your father gets the treatment he needs." Driving north toward Sacramento, I rehearsed conversations about gambling addiction, treatment programs, family therapy, financial counseling. Dad would need professional help to break destructive patterns that had led to this crisis. Mom would need support to process the betrayal and manipulation she'd endured. We'd rebuild together stronger than before, learning from mistakes that had nearly cost us everything. The check sat in my passenger seat like a weight representing not just money, but the complete upheaval of my carefully planned life. No business, no partnership, no professional prospects, no savings. Just family loyalty and hope that love could overcome the damage addiction had caused. But as Sacramento's skyline appeared in my windshield, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The decision was made, the sacrifice complete. Now we could focus on healing instead of choosing between competing loyalties. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected scene when I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home on Maple Street. Instead of finding my parents huddled in crisis mode, I discovered them hosting what appeared to be a neighborhood barbecue. Dad stood at his favorite grill flipping hamburgers while chatting casually with neighbors. Mom arranged fresh flowers in mason jars, her movements relaxed and cheerful. Catalina. Mom rushed toward my car with genuine delight, as if I'd arrived for a planned celebration rather than a financial emergency. Perfect timing. We're just getting everything ready. The normalcy felt surreal after 36 hours of liquidating my entire professional life. Neighbors I'd known since childhood waved from lawn chairs scattered across the backyard. Mrs. Henderson from next door was slicing tomatoes at the picnic table. Mr. Rodriguez was setting up a folding table for beverages. Everyone seemed relaxed, happy, completely unaware that 48 hours ago, this house was supposedly in imminent danger of foreclosure. "How are you feeling about everything?" I asked Dad as he transferred burgers to a serving platter. Much better now that you're here," he replied with a smile that seemed genuine, but somehow disconnected from the gravity of our situation. "Your mother and I have been talking about making some big changes, fresh starts, you know." I pulled the cashier's check from my purse hands, trembling slightly as I held it toward them. "This covers everything. $390,000. The house is safe." Mom gasped, pressing both hands to her chest as tears filled her eyes. Dad set down his spatula and pulled me into a fierce hug that smelled like barbecue smoke and aftershave. For a moment, surrounded by the familiar sounds of our neighborhood and the warmth of their gratitude, everything felt right. "We can't believe you did this for us," Dad whispered against my hair. "Sacrificing your business, your future. We don't deserve a daughter like you." "Family takes care of family," I replied, though something in his tone nagged at the edge of my consciousness. An odd formality, as if he were reciting lines from a script. "This calls for a celebration," Mom announced, wiping away tears. "Everyone gather around. Our daughter just saved our family home." The neighborhood crowd cheered and applauded as my parents shared the news. Mrs. Henderson hugged me tightly. Mr. Rodriguez shook my hand with solemn appreciation, and younger neighbors I barely remembered treated me like a returning hero. The attention felt overwhelming and somehow misplaced, as if I were receiving credit for something that shouldn't have been necessary in the first place. During dinner, as conversations flowed around the picnic table, I excused myself to use the bathroom inside the house. Walking through familiar rooms felt like stepping through a museum of my own childhood. Everything appeared normal. Family photos on the mantel, Mom's ceramic collection on the kitchen shelves, Dad's reading chair positioned perfectly for watching evening news. But in my parents' bedroom, something was wrong. Grandma's antique jewelry box, which had sat on Mom's dresser for as long as I could remember, was missing. The empty space looked like a gap in a smile, obvious and jarring. I opened the dresser drawers, finding them unusually organized, as if someone had recently sorted through everything. Walking to the garage, I discovered more disturbing evidence. Grandpa's tool collection, which had hung on the back wall for decades, was mostly gone. Empty hooks and nail holes marked spaces where hammers, wrenches, and hand saws used to hang. The workbench looked bare, stripped of the small machines and gadgets that had cluttered its surface since my childhood. When I returned to the backyard, Mom was serving dessert while Dad entertained neighbors with stories from his construction days. I waited until we had a moment of relative privacy before asking the question that was forming like ice in my stomach. "Where's Grandma's jewelry box?" Mom's fork paused halfway to her mouth and she exchanged a quick glance with Dad. "Oh, that old thing. I took it to an antique appraiser. Just curious about its value, you know." "And Grandpa's tools?" "Cleaning out the garage," Dad said casually. "Some of those old tools were rusted beyond repair. Figured it was time to declutter." The explanations felt rehearsed, delivered too smoothly for people who had supposedly been in financial crisis 48 hours earlier. I wanted to push further, but neighbors were still present and confronting my parents publicly felt inappropriate after they'd just experienced such relief. But as the evening progressed and guests gradually departed, a growing unease settled in my chest. The family heirlooms weren't just sentimental objects. They represented connections to relatives who had built the foundation my parents were supposedly fighting to preserve. Selling them felt like dismantling the very history I'd sacrificed everything to protect. "Tomorrow we'll go to the bank together and make everything official," Dad said as we cleaned up the backyard. "Get all this debt cleared and start fresh." "Absolutely." Mom agreed, gathering empty plates with movements that seemed oddly energetic for someone who had been sobbing with desperation just days earlier. A completely fresh start. Something in their enthusiasm felt forced, like actors maintaining character past the end of a performance. But exhaustion from the past week's emotional roller coaster made it difficult to analyze my suspicions clearly. I decided to sleep in my childhood bedroom and address my concerns in the morning when we could talk privately without neighborhood witnesses. Saturday morning brought the kind of crisp October air that made Sacramento feel like home, but breakfast conversation shattered any remaining illusions about my parents' intentions. As I sat at the kitchen table where I'd eaten countless bowls of cereal before school, Mom casually mentioned something that made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. "I've been practicing my Spanish with those language apps," she said while buttering toast. "Maria from my book club recommended this wonderful program for learning conversational phrases." Spanish. I set down my cup, focusing on her words with new attention. "For our move to Costa Rica," Dad chimed in from behind his newspaper. "Dorothy's been researching retirement communities down there. Beautiful weather year-round, low cost of living, excellent health care." The words hit me like cold water. Move to Costa Rica. Since when are you planning to move anywhere? Mom and Dad exchanged another of those quick glances that had been happening since my arrival. Mom's smile looked suddenly artificial, painted on like makeup over something she was trying to hide. "We've been discussing it for months, sweetheart," Mom said with forced lightness. "Even before this whole financial mess started. Frank and I aren't getting any younger, and we've always dreamed of living somewhere tropical for our retirement years." I pushed my chair back from the table, standing abruptly, as pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve began falling into place. "Months. You've been planning this move for months." "About 8 months, actually." Dad folded his newspaper and looked at me directly for the first time since I'd arrived. "We found this beautiful rental property in Manuel Antonio, right on the beach, 3-bedroom house with a garden for your mother. The rent is less than half what we'd pay for a similar place here in California." My mind raced backward through recent conversations, searching for clues I'd missed. Every phone call where Mom had reassured me about their finances. Every time Dad had mentioned being happy and settled in Sacramento. Every family discussion about future holiday plans that assumed they'd be staying in California. "You've been lying to me," I said quietly. "Not lying," Mom corrected quickly. "We just hadn't figured out all the details yet. The house situation forced us to accelerate our timeline." "The house situation." I repeated her words slowly, tasting their implication. "You mean the foreclosure crisis that required me to liquidate my entire business?" Dad stood up, his expression shifting to something more defensive. "We needed the debt cleared regardless of where we plan to live. You can't sell a house that's tied up in foreclosure proceedings." The truth hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't called me to save the family home. They'd called me to clear their debts so they could sell the property without legal complications. The $390,000 wasn't about preserving family legacy. It was about funding their retirement escape plan. "So you never intended to stay in the house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The house served its purpose." Mom replied, her maternal warmth replaced by practical calculation. "We raised our family here, made our memories. But it's just property, Catalina, buildings and land. What matters is that we're free to start the next chapter of our lives." Free. The word tasted bitter. Free with money from my destroyed business. "You chose to help us," Dad said firmly. "Nobody forced you to liquidate your company. You made that decision because you wanted to support your family. Based on information you deliberately misrepresented." Anger was building in my chest, hot and tight. "You let me believe you were fighting to save 4 generations of family history when you were actually planning to abandon it for a beach vacation." Mom's facade finally cracked, revealing something harder underneath. "We spent 32 years in this house, Catalina. 32 years of mortgage payments, property taxes, maintenance costs, neighborhood drama. We've earned the right to live somewhere that makes us happy. With money, you manipulated me into giving you." "With money you chose to give us," Dad corrected. "We told you about the debt. We told you we needed help. We never specified how we planned to use the house after the debt was cleared." The manipulation was breathtaking in its simplicity. They'd told me technical truths while withholding emotional context that would have completely changed my decision. They'd used my love for family history, my connection to childhood memories, my desire to preserve our legacy, knowing they planned to sell everything anyway. "What about Grandma's jewelry box?" I asked. "Grandpa's tools?" Research, Mom said matter-of-factly. We needed to know what everything was worth before we listed the house. The jewelry will help fund our moving expenses. The tools were mostly junk anyway. Mostly junk. I stared at her, seeing a stranger wearing my mother's face. Those were Grandpa's hands that touched those tools. He built half this house with them. He taught me to use them when I was 7 years old. Sentimental value doesn't pay for international relocations, Dad replied. We're being practical about our future. Standing in the kitchen where my grandmother had taught me to make tamales, where my grandfather had drawn architectural plans for his workshop addition, where 4 generations of my family had shared meals and celebrations and ordinary daily life, I finally understood the scope of my parents' betrayal. They hadn't just lied about their intentions with the house, they'd weaponized my love for family against me, using my deepest emotional connections to manipulate me into funding their retirement dreams while destroying my own future in the process. When do you leave for Costa Rica? I asked. Next week, Mom said. We've already arranged for an estate sale company to handle the furniture and remaining personal items. The realtor thinks the house will sell quickly in this market. Next week. I nodded slowly, processing the timeline. So my business sacrifice bought you exactly what you wanted. Clean title, no debt, maximum profit from the sale. Your sacrifice bought us freedom, Dad said. And it bought you the satisfaction of knowing you helped your family when we needed it most. The casual dismissal of my financial destruction, combined with their apparent expectation that I should be grateful for the opportunity to fund their escape, left me speechless. I walked to the window overlooking the backyard, staring at the oak tree where I'd learned to climb the flower beds, where Grandma had taught me about patience and nurturing the fence line, where Grandpa had shown me how to measure twice and cut once. Everything I'd sacrificed my future to preserve was about to be sold to strangers, while my parents sipped cocktails on a beach, funded by the wreckage of my professional dreams. I spent Saturday night in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by memories that felt like accusations. Every poster on the walls, every trophy on the shelves, every book that had shaped my teenage imagination seemed to mock me for believing family loyalty was more important than self-preservation. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by plans I couldn't quite form and anger I couldn't quite process. Sunday morning arrived with the sound of hammering that jerked me awake at 7:15. I stumbled to the window, expecting to see Dad working on some household project, but instead discovered a real estate agent installing a for sale sign in our front yard. The man was tall and professionally dressed, despite the early hour working efficiently with a rubber mallet to drive the metal stakes into the lawn. Bold red letters spelled out, Marcus Thompson Premier Properties, above a phone number, and the words, price to sell fast. My parents' bedroom was empty, their bed unslept in. No suitcases in the closet, no toiletries in the bathroom. Their car was gone from the driveway, leaving only oil stains on concrete as evidence they'd ever been there. I found the note on the kitchen counter, propped against the coffee maker like a piece of casual correspondence. The handwriting was Mom's, neat and controlled as always. Catalina, thanks for clearing it. We didn't want to live with a loser. Enjoy your life. Don't try to find us. Mom and Dad, the cruelty of it stole my breath. Not thank you for sacrificing everything. Not we're sorry for misleading you. Not even we love you despite our poor choices. Just dismissal and insult delivered with the casual indifference of people discarding something they no longer found useful. I read the note 3 times before the words stopped feeling like random symbols and started cutting like knives. They'd called me a loser, their daughter who had built a successful company from nothing, who had sacrificed everything to help them, who had liquidated 5 years of work in 36 hours to save what I thought was our family legacy. A loser. The real estate agent was photographing the house exterior when I walked outside, still wearing yesterday's clothes and carrying the note like evidence of a crime. Excuse me, I called to him. I'm the daughter of the owners. When did they hire you? Marcus Thompson looked up from his camera with professional sympathy. Last Tuesday, actually, they wanted everything ready to go as soon as the debt situation was resolved. I understand you helped them clear some financial complications. Last Tuesday. The timeline hit me like another blow. They'd hired him before I'd even agreed to liquidate my business, before I'd made any commitment to help. They'd been so confident in their ability to manipulate me that they'd already begun preparing to profit from my sacrifice. They mentioned they're relocating internationally, Marcus continued. Lovely couple, very excited about their new adventure. The house should move quickly at this price point, $450,000, below market value for a quick sale. $450,000. After my $390,000 debt clearance, they'd net approximately $60,000 in profit, plus whatever they'd received from selling Grandma's jewelry and Grandpa's tools. Enough to fund their Costa Rica relocation while leaving me financially destroyed and professionally ruined. Did they mention what happens to their daughter? I asked. Marcus's expression shifted uncomfortably. I don't typically discuss family situations with clients. My job is just handling the real estate transaction. Of course. I folded the note carefully and put it in my pocket. When do you expect the sale to finalize? With this pricing strategy, probably within 2 weeks. Maybe sooner if we get multiple offers. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, strangers would be living in the house where 4 generations of my family had built their lives, while I started over with no business, no savings, no professional prospects, and parents who'd abandoned me in a foreign country after calling me a loser. I walked back inside, moving through rooms that no longer felt like home. Every family photo on the walls seemed to mock me with images of happiness and connection that had apparently been nothing more than performance art. Every piece of furniture looked like evidence of a life I'd misunderstood. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Saw the news about TechFlow acquisition. Hope your family appreciates what you gave up. Don't contact me again. The message felt like salt in an open wound, but I couldn't blame her for the anger. I'd destroyed our partnership for parents who'd manipulated me into funding their retirement while treating me like a disposable resource to be used and discarded. Sitting on my childhood bed, surrounded by remnants of a life that suddenly felt like an elaborate lie, I tried to understand how I'd become so naive. The signs had been there. The secretive behavior, the inconsistent stories, the oddly relaxed demeanor during what should have been a financial crisis. I'd ignored red flags because I wanted to believe family loyalty was reciprocal. But as I stared at the for sale sign visible through my bedroom window, one thought kept circling through my mind like a persistent itch. Something about this situation still didn't make complete sense. The speed of their departure, the cruel note, the prearranged real estate listing. It all felt too calculated, too perfectly executed. Almost as if they'd done something like this before. Monday morning found me sitting in the Sacramento County Clerk's office, surrounded by the musty smell of old paper and the fluorescent hum of bureaucratic efficiency. I needed to understand the legal implications of my parents' house sale, partly to process my own situation and partly because something about their confident departure nagged at my instincts. The elderly clerk, Patricia Hughes, had worked in property records for 37 years and moved with the deliberate precision of someone who'd seen every possible variation of human greed and stupidity. She pulled up the property files for Maple Street with practiced keystrokes. "What exactly are you looking for, dear?" Patricia asked while waiting for the computer to load. "Information about ownership and any recent transactions. My parents are selling the house, and I want to make sure everything is legitimate." Always wise to verify. Patricia's fingers moved across the keyboard with surprising speed. Property fraud is more common than people realize, especially involving family members. The screen populated with information, and Patricia's expression shifted from routine helpfulness to puzzled concentration. She clicked through several pages, cross-referenced documents, then looked at me with genuine concern. "This is very interesting," she said slowly. According to our records, your parents haven't been the legal owners of this property for 15 years. My stomach dropped like I'd missed a step going downstairs. What do you mean? The house was transferred to someone named Catalina Rodriguez in 2008 with a provision allowing the previous owners to maintain residence until certain conditions were met. Patricia turned the monitor toward me. Would that be you? I stared at the screen, reading my own name in legal documents I'd never seen before. Transfer of ownership executed by Harold Rodriguez on March 15, 2008. My grandfather's name. My name, dates, and signatures that made no sense in the context of everything I thought I knew about my family's situation. My grandfather died when I was 13, I said numbly. I never knew anything about inheriting property. According to this will, he left the house specifically to you, with provisions that your parents could live there until your 30th birthday, or until they voluntarily vacated the property, whichever came first. Patricia pulled up additional documents. There's also a clause stating you weren't to be informed of the inheritance until your 25th birthday. My 25th birthday was 3 years ago. Then your parents should have told you 3 years ago that you owned the property. Patricia's voice carried the weight of someone who'd witnessed similar family betrayals. Instead, it appears they've been using your property as collateral for loans they had no legal right to secure. The implications crashed over me like successive waves. The foreclosure proceedings were invalid because Frank and Dorothy weren't the legal owners. The debts they'd accumulated were secured against property they didn't possess. The $390,000 I'd paid was covering fraudulent loans taken against my own house. How is this legal? I asked. It's not legal. It's multiple felonies. Patricia began printing documents with grim efficiency. Mortgage fraud, identity theft, forgery, wire fraud. Your parents have been committing crimes against your property for years. I thought about all the times Dad had mentioned improving the house value with renovations, all the occasions when Mom had talked about our mortgage payments and building equity. They'd been stealing from me while making me feel grateful for their parental guidance about financial responsibility. What happens now? I asked. You contact an attorney immediately. You file criminal charges. You stop that house sale. Patricia handed me a thick stack of printed documents. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is a criminal matter involving federal banking laws. Walking out of the county clerk's office, I felt like I was seeing my entire life through a different lens. My parents hadn't just betrayed my trust or manipulated my emotions. They'd been systematically stealing from me for years, using my own property to fund their lifestyle, while planning to disappear with the profits once they'd extracted everything possible. The note calling me a loser took on new meaning. They weren't just being cruel. They were covering their tracks, making sure I felt too humiliated and defeated to ask questions that might uncover their crimes. But as I sat in my car reviewing the property documents, one fact stood out like a beacon: I owned the house. Despite everything they'd done, despite all their fraud and manipulation, the property was legally mine, had been mine for 15 years without my knowledge. They'd stolen from me, lied to me, and abandoned me, but they'd also made a crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was too naive and trusting to investigate their betrayal. They were about to discover how wrong they'd been. Tuesday morning brought me to the downtown Sacramento offices of Michael Chen, an estate attorney recommended by Patricia Hughes for his expertise in property fraud cases. His office occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower that reflected the morning sun like a mirror, and Michael himself radiated the kind of calm competence that comes from handling legal crises as routine business. This is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases I've encountered involving family members, Michael said, after reviewing the property documents for 2 hours. Your parents didn't just commit isolated crimes. They executed a systematic theft operation spanning multiple years. He spread the paperwork across his conference table like evidence at a crime scene. Bank documents, mortgage applications, loan agreements, refinancing papers. all bearing my parents' signatures on property they'd never legally owned. Your grandfather was remarkably specific in his will, Michael continued. He wanted to ensure you inherited the family home, but recognized you needed time to mature before taking on property ownership responsibilities. The provision allowing your parents to live there was meant to provide stability during your education and early career years. Why didn't anyone tell me when I turned 25? Because telling you would have ended their fraud operation. Michael pointed to a series of loan documents dated after my 25th birthday. Look at these dates. They took out a second mortgage 6 months after you should have been informed about your ownership. They opened a home equity line of credit 10 months later. They knew their time was running out, so they accelerated their theft. The timeline painted a picture of escalating desperation and greed. As the deadline for revealing my ownership approached, my parents had extracted as much money as possible from property that wasn't theirs, apparently planning their Costa Rica escape well in advance. What about the gambling addiction story? I asked. Probably partially true, but not the whole picture. Michael pulled up financial records on his computer. Your father did lose significant money gambling, but he also used fraud proceeds to fund that gambling. He was stealing from your property to finance his addiction, then stealing more to cover his losses, creating a cycle that required increasingly sophisticated deception. And my mother knew. Dorothy's signature appears on most of these documents. Either she was complicit or she was also a victim of Frank's forgery. Michael's expression suggested he had strong suspicions about which scenario was accurate. However, her knowledge of the Costa Rica relocation plan indicates significant premeditation. The documents revealed a level of financial manipulation that went far beyond desperate parents asking their daughter for emergency help. This was organized crime involving identity theft, mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. They'd stolen my inheritance while manipulating me into feeling guilty about their manufactured crisis. Can we stop the house sale? Absolutely. You're the legal owner. You can halt any sale immediately. Michael reached for his phone. I'll contact the real estate agent today. We'll also need to file criminal charges against your parents for multiple federal crimes. What kind of sentences are we talking about? Wire fraud alone carries a maximum of 20 years in federal prison. Combined with identity theft, mortgage fraud, and the amounts involved, your parents are looking at potential sentences of 15 to 25 years each. Michael's voice carried no satisfaction in delivering this news. These are serious crimes with serious consequences. I stared out the window at Sacramento's downtown skyline, trying to process the magnitude of my parents' criminal behavior. They hadn't just betrayed family trust, they'd committed felonies that could result in them spending the rest of their lives in federal prison. There's something else you should know, Michael said carefully. I ran a preliminary background check on your parents' financial history. This isn't their first time committing fraud against family members. What do you mean? Property records show they inherited your father's mother's house in Stockton, 12 years ago, sold it immediately, and never distributed the proceeds to Frank's siblings as required by the will. There are also irregularities involving your mother's father's estate that were never properly investigated. The revelation hit me like cold water. My parents were career criminals who specialized in family financial fraud. They'd been stealing from relatives for years, perfecting their techniques until they were confident enough to execute their most ambitious theft, stealing from their own daughter while manipulating her into funding their escape. How do we proceed? I asked. First, we stop the house sale and establish your legal ownership. Second, we file criminal charges with federal prosecutors. Third, we trace your parents' location and initiate extradition proceedings if necessary. Michael began organizing documents into labeled folders. This is going to be a complex case, but the evidence is overwhelming. Your parents left a paper trail that clearly documents their crimes. Will I get the house back? You never lost the house. You've owned it for 15 years. What we need to do is clear the fraudulent liens and restore your property to its rightful status. Michael smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. By the end of this week, You'll have clear title to property that's worth approximately $500,000 in today's market. Walking out of Michael's office, I felt like I'd been reborn into a completely different reality. I wasn't a naive daughter who'd been manipulated by desperate parents. I was a crime victim whose stolen inheritance was about to be restored through the legal system. My parents weren't unfortunate people who'd made bad choices. They were career criminals who'd finally stolen from the wrong victim. The note calling me a loser suddenly seemed prophetic, but not in the way they'd intended. They'd underestimated me completely, assuming I'd accept their abandonment and cruelty without investigating the inconsistencies in their story. They were about to learn that their biggest mistake wasn't committing crimes against their daughter. Their biggest mistake was assuming their daughter wouldn't fight back. Wednesday brought revelations that transformed my anger into cold, calculated determination for justice. Michael had connected me with Amanda Rodriguez, a financial crimes investigator who specialized in tracking assets hidden through fraud schemes, and her discoveries made my parents' betrayal even more comprehensive than I'd imagined. Your parents didn't just commit mortgage fraud against your property, Amanda explained during our morning meeting in her downtown office. They've been systematically destroying your financial identity for years. She spread out credit reports, loan applications, and banking documents across her desk like a roadmap of identity theft. My social security number appeared on accounts I'd never opened credit cards, I'd never applied for business loans I'd never signed. 17 credit cards in your name, all maxed out. 3 business loans totaling $120,000. A car loan for a vehicle you've never owned. They've been using your identity to fund their lifestyle while destroying your credit score. Amanda's voice carried professional outrage. Your current credit score is 412. It should be close to 800 based on your actual financial history. The numbers felt like physical blows. 412. That credit score would prevent me from renting an apartment, getting a car loan, opening a bank account, or establishing utility services in my own name. My parents had systematically demolished my financial future while positioning themselves for comfortable retirement. How long has this been going on? Based on the account opening dates, approximately 6 years. They started small with department store cards, then escalated to major credit cards, then business loans using your information combined with fabricated employment records. Amanda pulled up a detailed timeline on her computer. The pattern suggests they've been planning this Costa Rica relocation for much longer than they claimed. Michael arrived with additional legal documents that painted an even darker picture. I've been coordinating with federal prosecutors, and they're treating this as organized financial crime rather than simple family dispute. The amounts involved and the sophistication of the fraud operation qualify for federal charges under multiple statutes. What kind of charges? Wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering. Michael counted off charges on his fingers. Each carries significant prison time, and they can be prosecuted consecutively rather than concurrently. Amanda opened a new folder containing international banking records. There's more. Your parents have been moving money offshore for 18 months, using shell companies and foreign accounts to hide assets they obtained through fraud against your identity. Shell companies. 3 corporations registered in Belize apparently established to launder money they stole using your social security number. They've been converting stolen funds into international investments, probably planning to access them from Costa Rica, where extradition is more complicated. The scope of their criminal enterprise was staggering. This wasn't desperate parents making poor choices under pressure. This was organized crime involving multiple jurisdictions, sophisticated money laundering techniques, and years of careful planning. They'd been treating me like a resource to be systematically exploited rather than a daughter deserving love and respect. Can we track them in Costa Rica? I've contacted Carlos Mendoza, an international fraud investigator who works with American law enforcement in Central America, Amanda replied. He's already begun tracing their location and monitoring their financial activities. Michael spread out a comprehensive legal strategy across the conference table. Here's what we're going to do. First, we'll file emergency orders to freeze all accounts connected to your identity. Second, we'll request federal arrest warrants for your parents. Third, we'll begin asset recovery proceedings to reclaim everything they stole. How long will this take? The legal proceedings could take months, but we can start damaging their comfortable retirement immediately. Amanda smiled with professional satisfaction. They think they've escaped to paradise with stolen money. They're about to discover that international financial crimes follow you anywhere in the world. What about my destroyed credit and financial identity? Identity theft restoration is complex but manageable with this much documentation, Michael explained. The evidence clearly shows you're a victim rather than a co-conspirator. We can begin the restoration process immediately while pursuing criminal charges. Amanda pulled up surveillance photos on her laptop, images of a beachfront property in Manuel Antonio, Costa Rica. This is where your parents think they're safe. Beautiful 3-bedroom house, ocean views, private garden. They're paying $4,000 monthly rent using proceeds from identity theft against their own daughter. Staring at photos of my parents' stolen paradise funded by the destruction of my financial life and professional future, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and confusion transformed into clear purpose. They'd assumed I was too naive and trusting to fight back against their crimes. They'd underestimated me completely. What do we need to do first? I asked. We file everything tomorrow morning, Michael replied. Criminal charges, asset freezes, extradition requests. By Friday afternoon, your parents will discover that their criminal enterprise has consequences they never anticipated. Amanda closed her laptop with finality. They called you a loser in that note, right? They're about to learn that their loser daughter is actually their worst nightmare, a crime victim who refuses to stay silent. Walking out of that meeting, I felt like a different person than the one who'd liquidated her business 5 days earlier to help desperate parents. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a prosecutor gathering evidence against career criminals who'd made the mistake of targeting someone with the intelligence and resources to fight back. My parents had taught me an important lesson about family loyalty. Now I was going to teach them an important lesson about consequences. Thursday morning brought unexpected intelligence from Carlos Mendoza that transformed our legal strategy from reactive to predatory. The international fraud investigator called at 8:30 with news that made my coffee taste like victory. Your parents aren't as clever as they think they are, Carlos said through the phone speaker in Michael's office. The property they claim to purchase in Manuel Antonio is actually a vacation rental they're subletting illegally. Amanda leaned forward with interest. Subletting illegally, how? The original lease agreement was for a 2-week vacation rental maximum occupancy, 4 people, no subletting permitted. Frank and Dorothy have been there for 11 days, violating their tourist visa status by establishing residency, and they're advertising the property online as a monthly rental to other American retirees. Michael smiled grimly while taking notes. So they're committing immigration violations and rental fraud in Costa Rica while thinking they've found sanctuary. It gets better, Carlos continued. They're using fake financial documents to try purchasing beachfront property through a local real estate agent, the same documents they used for the American fraud: fabricated bank statements, inflated income records, forged credit reports. The irony was beautiful. My parents had become so comfortable with criminal behavior that they couldn't stop committing fraud even when they should have been laying low in their supposed paradise. Their greed and dishonesty had become compulsive, making them vulnerable in the very country where they'd thought they'd found freedom. What's our next move? I asked. We let them dig their hole deeper, Amanda suggested. Costa Rican authorities take real estate fraud very seriously, especially when it involves Americans trying to manipulate their property markets. If we coordinate properly, your parents could be arrested in Costa Rica for local crimes while American prosecutors prepare extradition paperwork for the federal charges. How long do we wait? Carlos thinks they'll attempt the property purchase within the next week, Michael said. Costa Rican law enforcement is already monitoring the transaction. When they present fraudulent financial documents during the closing, local police will arrest them immediately. Meanwhile, we proceed with the American charges, Amanda added. Federal prosecutors are filing the criminal indictments today. By the time your parents are arrested in Costa Rica, they'll also be facing extradition to the United States for multiple felonies. Carlos provided additional details that revealed the extent of their continued criminal behavior. They've been approaching other American retirees in the Manuel Antonio area, offering to help them navigate Costa Rican real estate purchases using their expertise in international property transactions. They're essentially running confidence games against fellow Americans while hiding from American law enforcement. The pattern was consistent with everything I'd learned about their long-term criminal activities. Frank and Dorothy weren't capable of honest behavior even when honesty was essential for their survival. They'd become so addicted to fraud that they continued victimizing people even after executing their largest theft. "There's something else," Carlos said. "I've been monitoring their communications and they're planning to contact your brother Jake when he returns from deployment. They want him to wire money for what they're calling emergency expenses, related to their Costa Rica relocation." My stomach clenched with protective anger. Jake was scheduled to return from Afghanistan in 6 weeks, expecting to find his family intact and his sister successful in her Austin business. Instead, he discovered that our parents were international fugitives who destroyed my life and were now planning to steal from his military savings. "We stopped that immediately," I said. "Already handled," Michael replied. "I've contacted military authorities to warn them about potential fraud attempts against your brother. They'll brief him on the situation when he arrives stateside." Amanda pulled up a comprehensive timeline of our legal strategy. "Here's how this plays out. Today, federal prosecutors file criminal charges. Tomorrow, we freeze all accounts connected to the identity theft. Monday, Costa Rican authorities arrest your parents for local fraud charges. Tuesday, American prosecutors request extradition. By Wednesday, Frank and Dorothy will be sitting in a Costa Rican jail cell, contemplating 20-year federal prison sentences. What about asset recovery?" "We'll recover everything," Michael said confidently. "The paper trail is so comprehensive that tracing stolen assets will be straightforward. Plus, Costa Rican authorities will freeze their local accounts as part of the criminal investigation." Carlos provided final intelligence that sealed the trap. "Your parents have been bragging to other Americans about how they handled their family situation in the United States. Frank specifically told someone that they got their daughter to pay off all their debts before disappearing. They're treating your victimization like a successful business transaction. The casual pride they took in destroying my life crystallized my determination for complete justice. They weren't remorseful about their crimes. They were celebrating them. The note calling me a loser reflected their genuine belief that they'd outsmarted me permanently. "When do we spring the trap?" I asked. "Everything activates simultaneously on Monday morning," Amanda replied. "Costa Rican arrests American indictments, asset freezes extradition paperwork. Your parents will wake up in paradise and go to sleep in a jail cell." "What should I expect afterward?" "Full restoration of your financial identity, recovery of all stolen assets, clear title to your property, and the satisfaction of watching career criminals face appropriate consequences," Michael said, "plus compensation for the business losses you incurred because of their manipulation." Walking out of that meeting, I felt like justice was finally aligning with reality. My parents had spent years believing they were smarter than everyone around them, manipulating family relationships to fund criminal enterprises while treating their victims with contempt. They were about to learn that their smartest victim was also their most dangerous enemy. Friday morning brought an unexpected phone call that transformed my quest for justice into an opportunity for genuine healing. Marcus Thompson, the real estate agent, called at 9:15 with news about the potential buyers for my family's house. "I wanted to give you advance notice," Marcus said carefully. "The buyers are requesting to speak with family members before finalizing their offer. They seem like lovely people, but they have some personal concerns about the property's history." "What kind of concerns?" They're an older couple who lost their previous home to foreclosure fraud 2 years ago. They're understandably cautious about any transaction that might involve legal complications. An hour later, I sat across from Helen and Robert Martinez in Marcus's office conference room, looking into faces that reflected pain I recognized immediately. Helen was maybe 62 with silver hair and hands that trembled slightly when she spoke. Robert appeared a few years older, wearing the careful expression of someone who'd learned not to trust financial promises. "We saved for 37 years to buy our dream house in Modesto," Helen explained quietly. "A beautiful Victorian with original hardwood floors and a garden where I plan to grow vegetables. We put down everything we had, then discovered the sellers had forged the ownership documents." "Mortgage fraud," Robert added bitterly. "The real owners were overseas and had no idea their property was being sold illegally. We lost our entire life savings plus legal fees trying to recover our down payment." My chest tightened with empathy and irony. Here were genuine victims of exactly the type of fraud my parents had committed, now unknowingly trying to purchase property that was itself the center of a criminal case. "We can't afford to make another mistake," Helen continued. "This house represents our last chance to rebuild what we lost. If there are any legal problems, any complications with ownership, we need to know before we commit." I looked at Marcus, then back at Helen and Robert, feeling the weight of multiple people's dreams and disasters converging in one small conference room. These weren't investors or speculators. They were people who'd been victimized by criminals similar to my parents, now desperately hoping to rebuild their lives. "There are legal complications," I said slowly, "but not the kind you might expect." I explained everything. My grandfather's will, my parents' 15-year fraud operation, the identity theft, the criminal charges, the fact that I was the actual owner who'd never authorized any sale. Helen and Robert listened with expressions that shifted from fear to confusion to something approaching relief. "So the house isn't legally for sale?" Robert asked. "Not through my parents, no. They never had the right to sell property they didn't own." I paused, considering options I hadn't planned to explore. "But I do have the right to sell it if I choose to." "Would you consider selling to us?" Helen asked quietly. "We understand if you want to keep your family home, but we'd take excellent care of it. We know what it means to lose everything." Looking at their hopeful, cautious faces, I realized I had an opportunity to turn this property into a symbol of restoration rather than theft. My parents had stolen from me and planned to profit from their crimes, but I could ensure the house went to people who would genuinely treasure it, who understood the value of home and family. "What's your budget?" I asked. "We have $200,000 for a down payment," Robert replied. "We could qualify for a mortgage up to $400,000 total." "The house is worth at least $450,000 in current market," Marcus interjected professionally. "I'll sell it to you for $400,000, I said, watching their faces transform with disbelief and joy. No competition, no bidding war, no legal complications. Clean title, honest transaction people who'll actually live there and make it a home again. Helen began crying immediately. Robert reached across the table to shake my hand with trembling fingers. "Why would you do that for strangers?" "Because you're not strangers. You're people who understand what family and home really mean." I thought about my parents sipping cocktails on their stolen beach while planning to victimize my brother. This house deserves owners who'll honor what it represents. Marcus began pulling out purchase agreements and legal documents. "This is highly unusual, but if everyone's agreeable, we can structure a transaction that protects all parties and expedites the sale." "What about your parents?" Helen asked. "Won't they be upset about losing their sale?" "My parents are about to have much bigger problems than real estate transactions," I replied. "They'll be dealing with federal criminal charges for the next several years." Robert's expression shifted to concern. "Are you sure you want to sell? This was your childhood home." "My childhood home was built on lies and theft. What I want is to turn it into something honest and good again." I smiled at them both. Besides, I'll know exactly where to find you if I want to visit my grandfather's workshop. By noon, we'd signed preliminary agreements that would transfer ownership to Helen and Robert Martinez within 30 days. The $400,000 sale price would provide me with enough capital to rebuild my professional life, while ensuring the house went to people who would genuinely cherish it. "We'll send you photos of everything we do with the property," Helen promised as we prepared to leave. "The garden, any improvements, holiday celebrations. You'll always be welcome to visit." "I'd like that." I realized meaning it completely. My grandmother would have loved knowing her roses were being tended by people who understood their value. Walking out of Marcus's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began: genuine happiness about a decision involving the house. My parents had tried to turn our family legacy into profit from crime. Instead, it was becoming a foundation for healing and hope for people who'd survived similar betrayal. The irony was perfect. Frank and Dorothy had assumed they could manipulate me into funding their escape, then abandon me with nothing. Instead, their crimes had led to my discovering stolen inheritance, while their intended profit was flowing to victims who deserved a second chance at happiness. Justice was starting to feel like restoration rather than revenge. Monday morning arrived with the precision of clockwork and the satisfaction of long-awaited justice. Carlos Mendoza called at 8:43 with news that made my coffee taste like vindication. "Your parents were arrested 2 hours ago at the offices of Coastal Properties International in Manuel Antonio," Carlos reported with professional satisfaction. They were in the middle of presenting fraudulent financial documents when Costa Rican authorities moved in. Michael Chen leaned forward in his office chair, taking notes while I listened on speaker. "What exactly happened?" Frank and Dorothy arrived for their property closing with fabricated bank statements showing $2 million in liquid assets, forged credit reports, and falsified employment verification letters. When the Costa Rican property agent attempted to verify the documents through international banking channels, everything collapsed immediately. Amanda Rodriguez, who'd been monitoring the situation remotely, joined our call from her office. The Costa Rican real estate agent had been working with our fraud investigation unit for 3 days. Everything was recorded: their lies about American assets, their claims about legitimate income sources, their attempts to manipulate Costa Rican property laws. "Where are they now?" I asked. "San Jose Federal Detention Facility," Carlos replied. "They'll remain there while American prosecutors prepare extradition paperwork. Costa Rica takes real estate fraud extremely seriously, especially when it involves Americans trying to manipulate their economy with false documentation." The irony was breathtaking. My parents had become so comfortable with criminal behavior that they couldn't resist committing new frauds, even when they should have been hiding quietly in their supposed paradise. Their greed and dishonesty had become so compulsive that they'd essentially arrested themselves. Michael pulled up the American criminal charges that had been filed simultaneously with the Costa Rican arrests. Federal prosecutors have formally charged them with wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft conspiracy, and money laundering. The evidence package is over 400 pages of documentation. What are the potential sentences? Wire fraud alone carries up to 20 years per count. Identity theft adds additional time. Money laundering can be prosecuted separately from the underlying crimes. Michael's expression was grimly satisfied. "They're looking at potential sentences of 20 to 30 years in federal prison." Amanda shared additional details about the scope of their criminal operation that had been revealed through the investigation. The financial forensics team discovered they've been running similar fraud schemes against family members for over a decade. Your father's disabled brother, your mother's elderly aunt military benefits stolen from your brother Jake while he was deployed. They stole from Jake, too. Attempted to access his military banking while he was overseas. The attempt was blocked by military security protocols, but the intent was clearly documented. Amanda's voice carried disgust. These are career criminals who specialized in victimizing people who trusted them most. Carlos provided updates on their current situation that painted a picture of complete collapse. They're being held in separate cells, and they immediately began blaming each other for the criminal schemes. Frank claims Dorothy forged his signature on documents. Dorothy insists Frank manipulated her into participating against her will. Honor among thieves, Michael observed dryly. There's more, Carlos continued. Other Americans in the Manuel Antonio area have come forward with complaints about fraud attempts by your parents. They'd been approaching retirees with offers to help navigate Costa Rican real estate purchases, collecting advance fees for services they never intended to provide. The pattern was consistent with everything I'd learned about their systematic dishonesty. Frank and Dorothy weren't capable of legitimate behavior, even when honesty was essential for their survival. They'd become so addicted to exploiting people that they continued committing crimes even after executing their largest theft. What happens next? Extradition hearings will begin within 2 weeks, Michael explained. Costa Rica has strong extradition treaties with the United States for financial crimes. Your parents will be back in California facing federal charges within 30 days. Meanwhile, we continue asset recovery proceedings, Amanda added. We've frozen over $300,000 in accounts connected to their identity theft schemes. Plus, we're recovering the money they obtained by liquidating stolen property from your house. What about compensation for my business losses? Federal restitution laws require criminals to compensate victims for all damages caused by their crimes, Michael said. That includes the business you liquidated, lost income, credit repair costs, legal fees, and punitive damages. They'll be paying you restitution for the rest of their lives. Carlos provided final details that completed the picture of their downfall. The Costa Rican media has picked up the story. American criminals arrested for real estate fraud is big news here. Their mugshots were in the San Jose newspaper this morning with the headline, Gringos Fraudulentos. Fraudulent Americans, Amanda translated with amusement. Their criminal enterprise has become international news. Sitting in Michael's office processing the scope of my parents' arrest and the comprehensive evidence against them, I felt something I hadn't expected: sadness mixed with relief. These weren't desperate people who'd made poor choices under pressure. They were career criminals whose downfall was inevitable once someone refused to accept victimization silently. How do you feel about all this? Michael asked gently. Like justice is finally happening, I replied honestly. They spent years believing they were smarter than everyone around them, manipulating family relationships to fund criminal enterprises. They called me a loser for trusting them, then underestimated my ability to fight back. What's your next priority? Rebuilding my life with the foundation they tried to steal, I said, and making sure this experience helps other people avoid similar victimization. Walking out of that meeting, I felt like a different person than the one who'd liquidated her business 2 weeks earlier to help desperate parents. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor who'd transformed personal betrayal into systematic justice, proving that family loyalty should never require accepting criminal behavior from people who claim to love you. My parents had taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Trust must be earned through consistent actions, not demanded because of biological relationships. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected phone call that transformed my story of betrayal into a narrative of redemption. Sarah Martinez, my former business partner, called at 9:20 with words I'd never expected to hear again. Catalina, I owe you an enormous apology, Sarah said, her voice carrying genuine remorse. I've been following the news about your parents' arrests, and I finally understand what really happened to TechFlow. I sat in my temporary Sacramento apartment surrounded by legal documents and property papers, trying to process Sarah's change of heart. What do you mean? The venture capitalists called me yesterday. After they learned about your family's situation and the financial crimes you uncovered, they're even more interested in working with us than before. Sarah paused, gathering her thoughts. They said your willingness to sacrifice everything for family, combined with your ability to systematically expose complex fraud, demonstrates exactly the kind of character and problem-solving skills they want in business partners. The irony wasn't lost on me. Liquidating our company to help criminal parents had somehow made me more attractive to investors rather than destroying my professional credibility. They're offering $2.5 million in guaranteed funding to rebuild TechFlow, Sarah continued, plus legal support for your identity theft recovery business development resources and equity positions that would make us both financially secure within 2 years. Why are you telling me this? Because I was wrong about everything. I thought your parents were just irresponsible with money, and I accused you of enabling their poor choices. I didn't understand that you were actually a victim of systematic financial crimes. Sarah's voice strengthened with conviction. What you did wasn't naive family loyalty. It was incredible strength under circumstances that would have destroyed most people. I walked to my kitchen window looking out at the Sacramento skyline where my nightmare had begun 2 weeks earlier. What exactly are you proposing? Full partnership restoration, equal equity shared decision-making, combined expertise. Sarah spoke with the enthusiasm that had originally drawn us together in graduate school. But this time, we're not building from scratch. We're building from survival experience that most entrepreneurs never acquire. The investors really want to work with someone who just liquidated her entire company. They want to work with someone who can handle crisis situations with grace under pressure, someone who can systematically investigate complex problems, someone who demonstrates loyalty and integrity even when it costs everything. Sarah laughed softly. Plus, your fraud investigation uncovered financial analysis skills that impressed them more than our original business plan. The prospect of rebuilding TechFlow felt surreal after everything that had happened. 2 weeks earlier, I destroyed our partnership to fund what I thought was family preservation. Now that sacrifice had somehow led to opportunities that exceeded our original dreams. There's something else, Sarah said. The legal team handling your identity theft recovery has offered to work with us on developing fraud detection software for family-based financial crimes. They think our AI algorithms could be adapted to identify the kinds of manipulation patterns your parents used. Turn my personal nightmare into a business opportunity. Turn your survival into a tool that helps other families avoid similar victimization, Sarah corrected. The attorneys estimate that family-based financial fraud affects over 200,000 Americans annually. Most victims never recover because they don't know how to fight back systematically. The idea resonated with something deep in my chest. My parents had victimized me using sophisticated manipulation techniques that they'd probably perfected through years of exploiting other family members. If our software could identify those patterns early, we could prevent other children from experiencing the betrayal and financial destruction I'd endured. What would the timeline look like? 6 months to rebuild our core platform, another 6 months to develop the fraud detection algorithms, then market launch with venture capital backing and legal industry partnerships. Sarah's excitement was infectious. We'd be creating technology that protects families while building a business that's financially sustainable and emotionally meaningful. And you're sure the investors are committed? They're more committed than before. Your story demonstrates problem-solving abilities they didn't know they were getting with our original partnership. Sarah paused thoughtfully. They said most entrepreneurs talk about overcoming obstacles, but you actually did it under circumstances that would have ended most people's careers. I thought about Helen and Robert Martinez, who would soon be living in my childhood home, tending my grandmother's roses while rebuilding their own lives after fraud victimization. I thought about my brother Jake, returning from military deployment to discover his family had imploded, but his sister had survived. I thought about other families facing similar manipulation from people who should protect them. When do we start? I asked. Today, if you're ready. The investors want to meet with both of us this Friday to formalize the partnership and discuss development strategy. Sarah's voice carried the determination that had originally made us successful. We're not just rebuilding tech flow. We're building something bigger and more important than either of us imagined. What about our previous disagreement? Our previous disagreement was based on my misunderstanding your situation and your character. I thought you were choosing irresponsible family over responsible business. I didn't realize you were fighting systematic criminals while trying to preserve what you thought was legitimate family legacy. Sarah's voice softened with genuine regret. I should have supported you instead of threatening you. I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to be the partner you deserved during the crisis. Hanging up the phone, I felt like my life was finally aligning with the values that had guided me through the darkest period I'd ever experienced. Family loyalty had nearly destroyed me when directed toward criminals. But that same loyalty, combined with systematic problem-solving skills, was now creating opportunities to help other families while rebuilding my professional dreams on a foundation stronger than anything I'd lost. My parents had intended to leave me with nothing. Instead, their crimes had taught me everything I needed to build something meaningful from the wreckage they'd created. 6 months later, I sat in the federal courthouse in Sacramento, watching my parents face the consequences of crimes that had taken years to plan and execute. Frank wore an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller than I remembered. Dorothy's hands shook as she reviewed documents with her court-appointed attorney. The trial had become a media sensation after federal prosecutors revealed the scope of their criminal enterprise during pretrial hearings. Court documents showed 23 years of systematic fraud against family members, including elderly relatives, disabled siblings, and deployed military personnel. Federal prosecutor Diana Walsh stood before the jury with evidence boxes that represented hundreds of victims across multiple states. Ladies and gentlemen, Frank and Dorothy Rodriguez didn't commit crimes of desperation. They committed crimes of profession. Financial fraud was their career, and family relationships were their hunting ground. The evidence presentation took 3 days. Bank records showing stolen Social Security numbers, forged mortgage documents spanning 2 decades, identity theft against children and grandchildren, mail fraud targeting military families, money laundering through shell corporations, wire transfers to offshore accounts designed to hide stolen assets. These defendants specialized in exploiting the people who trusted them most, Diana continued. They used family love as a weapon against their own relatives, manipulating emotions to cover systematic theft operations. The defense strategy quickly collapsed when Frank and Dorothy's attorneys accidentally revealed additional crimes while trying to minimize their client's culpability. During cross-examination, Dorothy's lawyer mentioned similar arrangements with other family properties, before realizing he'd just confirmed prosecution theories about long-term criminal patterns. Your Honor, Diana Walsh addressed the judge, defense counsel has just confirmed our allegations about systematic fraud operations spanning multiple decades and numerous victims. The courtroom drama intensified when Jake, my brother, testified about discovering attempted theft from his military accounts while he was deployed in Afghanistan. His voice carried the controlled anger of someone who'd trusted people, who'd tried to steal from him while he was fighting overseas. I was risking my life for my country while my own parents were stealing from my bank account, Jake told the jury. They used my military service as cover for financial crimes, knowing I couldn't monitor my accounts from a combat zone. But the most devastating testimony came from Frank's disabled brother Thomas, who revealed decades of financial manipulation that predated even my own victimization. Thomas, who lived on Social Security disability payments, had been systematically robbed by Frank and Dorothy for 15 years. They convinced me to sign papers I couldn't read properly because of my vision problems. Thomas testified through tears. They said the documents would help me manage my finances better. Instead, they were stealing my disability payments while making me feel grateful for their help. The jury listened with visible disgust as prosecutors presented evidence of similar manipulation against Dorothy's elderly Aunt Frank's recently deceased mother and multiple family members who'd trusted them with financial assistance during medical emergencies or family crises. These defendants didn't just commit individual crimes, Diana Walsh explained during closing arguments. They operated a criminal enterprise that specialized in family-based financial fraud. They perfected techniques for emotional manipulation that allowed them to steal from the people who loved them most. The defense attorneys attempted to portray Frank and Dorothy as victims of gambling addiction and poor financial decisions, but the evidence of systematic planning and sophisticated money laundering undermined any claims about impulsive behavior or desperation. Gambling addiction doesn't explain shell corporations in Belize, Diana observed. Desperation doesn't explain 23 years of forged documents. Poor financial decisions don't explain systematic identity theft against disabled relatives. When the verdicts were read, Frank was convicted on all 14 federal charges. Dorothy was convicted on 11 charges. The jury had deliberated for less than 6 hours, spending most of that time reviewing evidence rather than debating guilt or innocence. Judge Patricia Hernandez scheduled sentencing for the following month, but provided preliminary guidance that chilled the defendants and satisfied the victims. The scope of these crimes, the vulnerability of the victims, and the defendants' complete lack of remorse warrant sentences at the upper end of federal guidelines. Frank Rodriguez, you are sentenced to 22 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Dorothy Rodriguez, you are sentenced to 18 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. The judge continued with restitution orders that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Full compensation to all victims, including business losses, credit repair costs, legal fees, and punitive damages. The defendant's assets will be liquidated to begin immediate restitution payments. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't expected: peace, rather than satisfaction. Justice had been served, but more importantly, other families would be protected from similar victimization. The case had generated enough media attention to raise awareness about family-based financial fraud, and new legislation was already being proposed to strengthen protections for victims. Jake walked beside me, his military bearings softened by genuine relief. "Are you okay with how this ended?" "I'm okay with how this began," I replied. 2 years ago, I thought family loyalty meant accepting whatever treatment family members gave you. Now I know it means protecting the people you love from anyone who would harm them, even when the threat comes from within the family itself. What happens now? Now we build something better from what they tried to destroy. I looked back at the courthouse where my parents would spend the next 2 decades contemplating their choices. They taught us the most valuable lesson of our lives. Family should be about love and support, not manipulation and exploitation. The vindication was complete, but more importantly, the healing could finally begin. 1 year later, I stood in the bright modern offices of the Martinez Family Foundation, named not after my parents, but after Helen and Robert Martinez, the fraud survivors who had bought my childhood home and transformed it into a symbol of healing and hope. The foundation occupied the top floor of a downtown Sacramento building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, where my nightmare had begun and my recovery had taken root. Sarah stood beside me reviewing quarterly reports that showed our impact on families across the country. 1,200 families assisted with fraud recovery in our first year, Sarah said with the satisfaction of someone whose technical skills were finally serving a meaningful purpose. Average recovery time reduced from 18 months to 6 months through our AI-powered detection systems. TechFlow Solutions 2.0 had exceeded every projection our venture capitalists had imagined. Our fraud detection software identified family-based financial manipulation patterns with 93% accuracy, helping banks, credit agencies, and law enforcement prevent crimes before they destroyed lives. but the foundation represented the heart of our mission, direct assistance for families who'd already been victimized. Helen Martinez served as our client services coordinator, using her own recovery experience to guide other families through the complex process of reclaiming stolen identities and rebuilding financial stability. Robert managed our legal assistance program, connecting fraud victims with attorneys who specialized in prosecution and asset recovery. The Henderson family in Portland recovered $87,000 stolen by their son's gambling addiction. Helen reported during our weekly staff meeting. The Williams family in Miami successfully prosecuted their daughter-in-law for identity theft. The Chen family in Boston prevented their elderly father from losing his house to mortgage fraud. Each success story represented validation of the lesson my parents had inadvertently taught me. Systematic problems require systematic solutions, and surviving victimization means transforming personal pain into tools that help other people. Jake had joined our team after completing his military service, bringing skills in data security and veteran advocacy that strengthened our ability to serve military families. His experience with attempted financial fraud while deployed had made him passionate about protecting service members from exploitation. Military fraud cases increased 37% this year, Jake reported, but our early detection protocols helped prevent over $2 million in attempted theft from deployed personnel accounts. Amanda Rodriguez continued working with us as head of financial investigations, training law enforcement agencies across the country to recognize and prosecute family-based fraud schemes. Her expertise had been instrumental in securing convictions in over 40 cases involving systematic financial manipulation between relatives. The Rodriguez case precedent has changed how federal prosecutors approach family fraud, Amanda explained. Courts are recognizing that emotional manipulation combined with financial theft represents organized crime, not family disputes. Michael Chen had become our general counsel, developing legal strategies that helped victims recover assets while ensuring criminals faced appropriate consequences. His work on restitution enforcement had recovered over $4 million for fraud survivors in our first year. Your parents' restitution payments have funded 3 full-time victim advocates, Michael noted with grim satisfaction. Their crimes continue generating resources to help the people they tried to destroy. The Foundation's motto, displayed prominently in our reception area, read, "When family fails, community heals." But our daily work proves something more profound. When victims refuse to stay silent, their courage creates protection for countless others. My computer chimed with a message from Carlos Mendoza in Costa Rica, who'd become our international fraud consultant. He regularly updated us on my parents' situation, partly for legal documentation and partly because their continued consequences validated our mission. Frank and Dorothy remain in federal prison, both scheduled for release in approximately 20 years. Neither has expressed remorse or acknowledged responsibility for their crimes. However, their case has become required study material for international law enforcement training programs. I thought about the note they'd left calling me a loser, and how completely wrong they'd been about who I was and who I would become. Their attempt to destroy me had instead taught me everything I needed to build something meaningful from the wreckage they'd created. The Foundation's success had attracted national attention, including invitations to testify before congressional committees, developing stronger protections for fraud victims. But the work that mattered most happened in individual conversations with families who'd survived betrayal and needed guidance for rebuilding their lives. We've proven that family-based financial fraud can be defeated through systematic detection, aggressive prosecution, and comprehensive victim support, Sarah observed as we reviewed our annual impact report. More importantly, we've shown that surviving victimization can become a foundation for protecting other people. Helen knocked on our office door, her face bright with the kind of excitement that indicated particularly good news. "Catalina, there's someone here who wants to thank you personally." In our reception area, I found a young woman, maybe 25 years old, accompanied by an older man who looked nervous but determined. They introduced themselves as Maria and Carlos Santos, a father and daughter from San Diego, whose family had been saved by our fraud detection algorithms. My father almost lost his construction business to mortgage fraud committed by my stepmother, Maria explained. Your software identified the forged documents before the bank processed the loan applications. We prevented $300,000 in theft because of your foundation's work. Carlos Santos shook my hand with the calloused grip of someone who built things with his tools and sweat. My daughter says you survived something similar to what almost happened to us. I wanted to thank you for turning your pain into protection for other families. These were the moments that justified everything real people whose lives were better, because I'd refused to accept victimization silently. My parents had intended to leave me with nothing. Instead, their crimes had taught me to build something that mattered more than anything I could have imagined. As I walked to my car that evening, I passed the house where Helen and Robert Martinez lived among my grandmother's roses. They'd invited me for dinner, continuing the tradition they'd established of including me in their family celebrations. The house had become what it was always meant to be, a place where people who understood the value of family created genuine love and support. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Dinner Sunday, I'm making Grandpa's enchilada recipe in my new apartment. My brother had found his own path to healing, creating traditions that honored our grandfather's memory while building relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. We'd learned to be family for each other in ways our parents never understood. Driving home through Sacramento traffic, I reflected on the journey from financial destruction to meaningful purpose. 2 years earlier, I'd thought family loyalty meant accepting whatever treatment family members gave you. Now I understood it meant protecting the people you love from anyone who would harm them, even when the threat comes from within the family itself. My parents had taught me the most valuable lesson of my life: trust must be earned through consistent actions, not demanded because of biological relationships. More importantly, they'd shown me that surviving betrayal could become a foundation for building something beautiful and lasting. The Martinez Family Foundation would continue growing, helping families across the country recover from financial fraud, while building lives based on genuine love and mutual respect. Every family we helped represented proof that criminal manipulation could be defeated by systematic resistance and community support. In the end, my parents' note calling me a loser had been prophetic, but not in the way they'd intended. I'd lost their false version of family, but gained the ability to build something authentic and meaningful from their betrayal. Sometimes the best revenge is living so well that your enemy's attempts to destroy you become the foundation for your greatest success. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to rebuild when the people closest to you turned out to be the ones causing the most damage? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more true stories about overcoming family betrayal and financial manipulation. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from understanding how systematic fraud works and how victims can fight back effectively. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Remember that surviving betrayal isn't about becoming bitter or cynical. It's about learning to build genuine relationships based on trust that's earned rather than assumed. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly deserve your love and loyalty.